Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimmy Johnson, and I am honored to be introducing our first speaker of the day, Eileen Kohl Kaufman. Ms. Kaufman graduated from Wellesley College in 1966 and was an econ major, largely because Professor Carolyn Bell mentored and even hunted her down, as she did decades of other Wellesley women. In 1997, Professor Bell wrote, "We need every day to herald some woman's achievements, to tout a woman's book or painting or scholarly article, to brag about a promotion or prize, and to show admiration for the efforts and influence of women in their professional and technical and social and human endeavors of all kinds." Ms. Kaufman epitomizes the accomplishments that Professor Bell encouraged us to celebrate. After earning her BA in economics from Wellesley, Ms. Kaufman earned an MA in finance and an MA in economics and an MBA in finance from Columbia University. Currently, she serves as the executive director of Social Accountability International and has held that position since SAI was incorporated in 1997. Prior to joining SAI, she was director of strategic planning at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. As strategic planner at the New York City Department of Design and Construction, and a financial planner at the New York City Water Board. She worked at the Council on Economic Priorities at its inception and co-authored Paper Profits, an analysis of paper mill pollution and its control. She participates in the work of the Steering Committee for the Business Principles for Countering Bribery, and also in the work of 2 UN Global Compact working groups on human rights and supply chain sustainability. She's also co-authored 2 recent publications on implementation of labor standards, From Principles to Practice, the role of SA 8000 in implementing the UN Global Compact, and From Words to Action, a business case for implementing workplace standards, which we read today. I am happy, yes, some of us. I am happy, some of it, yes, they were pretty long. I am happy not only to celebrate Ms. Kaufman's accomplishments, as Professor Bell would have hoped, but also feel privileged to learn from her experiences today. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Eileen Kohl Kaufman.
I have a couple thoughts from just the previous speakers. Yesterday, I watched the end of the Netflix movie I'd had for only about 8 weeks, which was the Pentagon Papers, and it ends in a blaze of glory with two judicial acts. The Supreme Court Justice Black talking about how the First Amendment is the key, possibly, to the democratic system, and then the judge in Ellsberg's case saying that the evidence had been so tainted by various administration actions, including the Watergate burglaries and the burglary of Dr. Fielding's office, that that case could not proceed. And it does make, of course, those of us who are older think of what would the courts be deciding now, but we are very grateful they decided those things then. And the other thought I had, anyway, so I commend, actually the movie was not too bad. It wasn't very good, but it wasn't too bad. The other thing I was thinking about is, and which is possibly more germane to my work and to what I'm going to talk about, is there's a big difference, big gap between the existence of laws, the existence of norms, the existence of international compacts, of international rules, and practice. Just the way there's a big gap in any given place between the existence of laws and they're being followed. Our work is directed perhaps mainly toward where labor laws exist and labor laws are not being followed. But the world is full of laws that people don't follow. And so I do not obey the speeding laws, for instance, even though they exist. And the availability of resources is not necessarily the answer either. So India now has, it's fabulous news that India has really moved to vaccinate people and to seriously fight against polio. This year, well, last year, there were several cases in Long Island of whooping cough, a disease which stopped existing soon after I was a child because immunization became available. So again, the availability of tools or the availability or presence of legislation, of rules, of norms, even of morality, doesn't mean they're being followed. And there are a lot of different ways then of seeking to help move that forward. I'm really glad to be here. We have had, as you may know, I hope you know, we have every summer 2 or 3 Wellesley students who intern for us, and they're all sort of scary to me. Everybody speaks more languages than I do. Everybody has lived in more countries than I have, and they are all, everyone has been extremely knowledgeable and extremely wonderful to have with us. So I know your cadre and like it and admire it. I told Kimmy that I was going to say one more thing. So we got all this economic stuff and so forth. In fact, just for disclosure, my junior and senior years at Wellesley, 90% of the time I was on campus, I was at Shakespeare Society, not in any of my virtuous things. So, anyway, so I'm happy to be here because I know about your program. I know about some of your peers, and I'm impressed by it. The standards organizations like ours, these series of multi-stakeholder initiatives, are NGOs fulfilling a role that is reflected or acknowledged in U.S. regulations. We are a tax-exempt organization because we fulfill a public purpose. We are carrying a burden that otherwise government would have to provide. That's the legislative or regulatory context of giving a tax deduction to an organization. They are relieving the government of a burden. So perhaps we are doing that. Perhaps in some places we are relieving governments of burdens of enforcing regulations, of defining what is good practice, and supplementing the resources of governments with private resources, and creating coalitions to do that. SAI is 15 years old. We'll be 15 on May 7th. But we're built on a movement for ethical investing, which started at least 50 years ago, in the early 60s. The International Center for Corporate Responsibility, Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, has been in the forefront of ethical investing for a long time, and has been meeting with companies for, I guess, these 40 or 50 years, helping them to see what policies they could follow which would improve the world, or which at least would be compliant. There's also a whole set of themes along with the theme of a multi-stakeholder organization, theme from the ILO, which is a tripartite organization, business and trade unions and government. So coalitions and bringing the experts together at the table and the experts together in the field is not something we've invented, but it's something that cannot be overstressed as being important. It's important for 2 reasons. It's important for the obvious reason that it's democratic. If you are working on things which are affecting certain parties, those parties have a right to be at the table. It's also efficient because those parties are the experts. And if you bring together the people who are on the ground, in the factories, in the movements, working on whatever it is every single day, and they come together to help devise solutions or approaches or tools or training, it's going to be better quality because you have the people who are most knowledgeable around the table. And I think that that's very important to think about and to know and to remember, because sometimes a lot of what we talk about and a lot of what we do is on a very high moral ground and on a matter of principle and virtue and so forth. But it's also practical. And that's why I'm here, to talk about being practical. One of the concepts, two of the concepts behind starting Social Accountability International were to write down a workplace code of conduct that was based on international norms and then to simultaneously produce a system for verifying compliance with it. This how do you know question is a very important question throughout a lot of policy questions and moral questions, I believe. So how do you know what the rules are? Well, there may be international rules, and there certainly is often legislation. How do you implement those rules? How do you carry out what they tell you to do? How do you verify if you're doing it? And how do you verify if someone else is doing it? So one of the things we find is that people don't necessarily know that they're not really doing what they intend to do. You know, having a policy is not the same as carrying it out. Having a plan, having a New Year's resolution is not the same as carrying it out. And so so the verification system and indeed the certification system is important as benchmarking, so you know what to work on, what's not happening. But also it's important because it's a cost saver. Information costs of finding out whether or not international norms are being followed in a workplace or someplace else can be very, very high. And one of the important parts, important uses of these certification systems of some kind of stamp of approval awarded by experts, just the way universities have accreditation, is to save every single user, every single customer from having to research the issue themselves. And those information costs are clearly prohibitive. Something as simple and obvious as a pair of jeans. I have spoken to somebody once who said, well, if you want to know which jeans to buy, you just go online, for God's sake, and you're not that old, and research all the companies. Okay, that's not, this is not practical. It's not practical for one item a year or for one item a month. It's clearly not practical for a wide range of items, and it's clearly not practical for the companies from whom we buy our goods, who have thousands of suppliers to do. So if you want to get something to happen, you have to not only figure out what it should be, but you would also have an obligation, it seems to me, to deliver a methodology for making it happen. And that's why it's fun to do what we do. So we all were trained as researchers and as conceptual thinkers. And it's really fun every day to be actually an implementer, to see that you are doing things which, although obviously based upon an entire body and a large history and a large current world of conceptual thinking and morality, is real. And stuff is happening in specific places because we are working to implement these morals. But the how do you know, when you think about anything in these areas, it's a really big question. And it's a question that needs to be asked, can always be asked. And the answers are, and the lack of an answer is often very interesting. So everyone has, good intentions. And then the question is, how do you know if they're being fulfilled? And that was, again, part of the cause for us, for I guess SAI being started. A lot of companies had codes of conduct. First one probably in a clothing code of conduct was Levi's. And they asked their suppliers to sign a codicil to the contracts saying, we are following your code of conduct. And after a little while, they realized that people signing something didn't mean they were doing it. And so then then this whole world of verification of good practices in garment manufacturing started. And soon afterwards, analyses showed that every company had its own code of conduct, every company had its own way of finding out or trying to find out whether or not it was being followed. And it was inconsistent, it was extremely expensive. It was extremely expensive for every company to do their own investigating. It was extremely expensive for a given supplier who might have 5, 10 different customers, each of whom wanted to come in and verify their own specific code of conduct, which was probably different in at least one sentence from the other guy's code of conduct. And we're not past that world yet. There's still many organizations and industry associations, individual companies who believe that their code of conduct needs to be a standalone, that it's not sufficient to say our code of conduct is the same as theirs plus this, which would be logical. We are working with one organization now who we think will be moving toward this. We're working with the UN Women on a gender equality standard, which we believe will be a plug-in to many other standards. But again, from the previous conversation, there is a new intellectual property protection initiative started by Microsoft, which felt that, maybe they won't continue to feel this way, but felt that the intellectual property issues are so important that they could not possibly be folded into the existing electronics industry code of conduct. So that now is yet another parallel universe. Now I'll try to talk about what we do. So we are, let's see, whoops. Okay. Yeah, I found it wasn't the arrow button, it was the page down button. So we have a structure of how we do what we do. We do this by consensus, by convening key stakeholders. There'll be there's a list of our advisory board a little bit later on. We believe in voluntary standards and their potential usefulness, and we believe in verification so that you know whether or not you or other people are following it. So that's what SAIS does. SAIS oversees inspection companies for quality and consistency. Well, I'll talk about that later. And so what we think, so the SAI 1000 standard is global, verifiable, used in many, many sectors, and developed by this coalition. It's based upon these international norms. It's not something that was invented by a group of people, no matter how well-meaning and brilliant, sitting in New York or London. It has 9 parts. This lists the 8 parts that are the performance requirements, the basic criteria, and they are what you would, I think, expect to see. The 9th section is extremely interesting, and I'm sorry it's not on the slide, but the 9th section is a management systems requirement. And it says that even if you are compliant with all 8 performance moral elements, economic elements, you also you cannot get certified to SAI 1000 unless you also have a management system in place to make it likely that your good behavior will be ongoing, will be sustained, that you have policies and practices in place to correct problems when they arise. I mean, problems always arise. And the snapshot, any inspection, any audit is a snapshot. How do you make it more useful than that, make it more meaningful than that? And the story that I usually tell on this is, again, in the mid-90s, I guess. Nike hired Andrew Young, I guess he was mayor, governor, to go to visit 15 of their factories in Vietnam, which there were concerns about. And he went to Vietnam for 2 weeks. He visited 15 factories, and they were fine. Now, this doesn't say anything. Okay, so that's a piece of information, and take it. The days that Andy Young was there, those factories were fine. How were they the week before? How will they be next week? That's where we come in. That's where the 9th section comes in. What reason do you have to have confidence that they'll be the same next week? Or that when something goes wrong, it will be fixed? Or that when the benign current manager breaks his leg, gets promoted, she moves to another town, that the systems are in place so that good practices continue. So the management system section is extremely important. It is missing from 99% of standards, and I would suggest that you look to that when you look at codes of conduct of any kind, including legislation and regulation. You look to the implementation clause. And if there's not a strong implementation clause, then it really doesn't matter what the requirements are, because there's no way to be confident that they're being followed. The first summer job I ever had was writing a report about the state of environmental rules in the United States. And that is before the EPA was created. But anyway, so I read all the state air pollution laws and water pollution laws. And all the state air pollution and water pollution laws were virtually the same until you got to the end, to what the implementation policies were, what the sanctions were, whether there were resources to enforce them. And so after about 12 states, I got smart, and I just started at the end. Because if there wasn't a strong implementation clause, if there wasn't someone to whom authority was assigned to enforce them, it didn't matter what the first parts were. So this is demonstrating our multi-stakeholderness. Our board is half business and half non-business, also demonstrating our internationalness. Cibo is a German company, Lega Co-op is Italian, Tata is Indian, Carrefour is French, PGC is also an Indian company. Eileen Fisher, your mothers know if you don't. GAP TNT is a Dutch-based company. It's like FedEx. Otto is German. Chise is an Italian inspection company. We have one inspection company on our board at all times as a reality check. We'd like to, is this auditable? Is this verifiable? What experiences are you having verifying? Yeah, the last two everybody knows, right? That's some. Eileen Fisher and Gucci, of course, get attention when I talk to my peers. You know, and they say, "What do you do?" I go, "Blah blah blah, labor, 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 blah blah." Eileen Fisher, Gucci. And the civil society part of our board, UNI, the second one is Geneva-based coalition of retail workers and other fun things like Screen Actors Guild is also a member of UNI. The second one is the Italian Union, Foreign Trade Association, headquartered in Belgium but representing major retailers throughout Europe. Ethos is Brazilian. World Wildlife Fund. Solidaridad is the Dutch organization that actually founded the fair trade movement with a brand called Max Havelaar. Alan Spaulding is an American, and that's American Union, SAI, and Rainforest Alliance you probably know, and you may know the little frog on bananas. We work directly with companies, so having the basis of our work is the SAI 8000 standard, and the second basis A of our work is the SAI 8000 standard. Basis B of our work is the multi-stakeholder nature and the ability to understand and call on the experts in the various sectors. And then the third basis is training, implementation, is capacity building. We started up, and the first thing we did after we published our system was to train our own auditors who were going to be audited in the auditing firms. And then it became clear to us, it probably would have been clear to other organizations, but anyway, it became clear to us and has now become clear again throughout our industry that everyone needs training. It's a new standard. We trained our own auditors who were going to audit the auditors. We trained the auditors. We now, most of what we do is capacity building in one sort or another. Capacity building for companies to help them learn how to effectively implement these programs, effectively implement these rules, how to measure, and how to, we hope, measure improvement so that then they will have incentives to continue to do them. Very often left out in all these analyses of do the right thing and so forth is why should people do the right thing, or why do people do the right thing? And in a business environment, some people may start and may be able to maintain good policies because they believe in the good policies. Some people may not. Some people may need financial incentives. They may need to see a return on the investment in a good workplace. And one of the things we try to do is help them figure out how to measure that, how to calculate a baseline, and then how to see what their improvements are. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, heard a very nice story. Anyways, this is one of the big issues. Why should we do it? It's expensive and we're barely surviving. The head of Manpower, which is the international, very large temp workers agency, said he had gotten religion and had gone to his board and suggested 3 social programs that he thought they should do. They evidently work in at least 70 different countries. And the board said, it's too expensive, we can't do it. But after a while, he persuaded them to let him try it in one country. So they did this experiment in Mexico with 3 programs for training migrant workers, for training women who had been in dangerous situations, and a 3rd project, which I keep forgetting. At the end of a year or so, he could report to the board, and now has been able to report to everyone who will stop and listen, that their own staff attrition rate had declined by 15%. And they surveyed their workers, and the workers said they felt they wanted to work for this company because this company had good social policies and was a responsible company. He figures, and he's an expert in this, obviously, that to replace a worker costs 1.5 times the annual salary. So this was a real, some people hate to hear me say this was a win-win. They had a very positive return on their investment in social projects, which were not even directly in their own house, but were for the benefit of the community in which they live. And so they're going to be doing similar programs in more countries. So that's a very nice, straightforward, and neat result. So we work with companies to help them improve. Whoops. These are some companies who are members, which means we provide a lot of training services for them, and that they will be reporting out, and they report out en masse as a group on their results. In this way, by reporting on key performance indicators, which are a standardized method across the group of reporting on how well their suppliers rate on these different elements, on having a management system, having an internal compliance team, controlling their subcontractors, communicating with workers, extremely important. That's sort of the other side of the ILO's freedom of association requirement. Complaint management and resolution, again, is extremely important. What happens if there's a problem in the workplace? Does the person who complains get fired, or does the problem get addressed? External engagement, that's more possibly like manpower. What are the needs, and what are the interests, and what is the information, again, that people in your communities have? Dan? So we've been doing all this training, and we do training in many categories and in many countries. We started off, as I said, training auditors. We continue to train auditors. We train business managers, both managers of supply chain, say employees of Gap, or of Chibo, or of other retailers, and we also train managers of individual factories. We train workers. The first large project we had was a project to train union leaders in 8 different countries on basically on the ILO basic rights, but also on how they were included and documented within the SAI 1000 standard. And then those people went back to their factories and trained in a study circle training methodology, and trained other people on what their rights are in the workplace, so that people know what they're entitled to. And then our work is basically, one way of looking at what we do is enabling workers to realize their rights in the workplace. And this is a lot of structure for that, but it's a big issue. It's a big problem. I'm going to figure. And not only do we have partnerships within our organization, within our advisory board, but we also have most of our work in the field is done in partnerships. So as Kimmy mentioned, I'm on UN Global Compact Working Group on Human Rights, which is, and this is interesting because the Global Compact is basically set up to be an organization of businesses. And so it's been more recently that they've started having other experts sort of sneak in and provide some information to the groups of companies coming together. When it was first started, it was so business-oriented that they didn't release the names of the members. And that was, and to this day, the membership, there are now 5,000 or 6,000 organizations around the world that are members. It's still very light in the United States because a lot of legal departments at U.S. companies feel that they might be called to demonstrate they were following the Global Compact commitment if they signed onto it. SINTAC is the Chinese National Textile and Apparel Council. We have an MOU with them. We're going to be doing a joint meeting next week, February 20th. We're doing a joint meeting with them in China, a multi-stakeholder consultation, again with trade unions, government, businesses, to talk about a couple of specific issues. We've been having these meetings now for 15 years, and we are able to bring together disparate groups because it's not a sort of bonding meeting. It's a meeting, there's very technical meetings to discuss specific issues, and people can come into the room and they don't have to love each other. We don't have to love each other when they come in. We don't have to love each other when they leave, but very often they can engage constructively on a specific issue. And the Project Cultivar, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute, in Central America, over a 3-year period, we had 32 of these meetings in a region, Central America, where relations between business and NGOs and trade unions are very contentious. International Finance Corporation lends money. It has criteria for its borrowers, which are called the PS2 standards, performance standards, I guess, not very subtle. And we've done a handbook for them to distribute to those suppliers, to those borrowers who are generally suppliers, on how to follow the PS2 standards. So it's a training handbook. And now the PS2 standards have just been revised, and we're doing a revision of the handbook. That's available if you want to look at it on IFC's site and also on our site. Cotton Made in Africa is a program to labeled cotton, which comes from farms which have gotten various kinds of training and other support. So it's income maintenance. And we're the representative in North America for helping to persuade companies to use cotton made in Africa. The WE program is a coalition between Chibo, this German company, and the German government to do very in-depth training in individual factories. A lot of time spent to train workers, create workers' committees, and train management in China and now in India. SAI 1000, the next one, the SAI 1000 is a preference for Dutch government procurement, so you get extra points in applying for a government contract if you're SAI 1000 certified. ICO is another Dutch organization. There's a lot of virtue in Holland as well as in Norway, although I see we don't have Norway here yet. But it's an interfaith coalition in the Netherlands, and we are jointly doing a handbook again on what is casually called the Ruggie principles. Do we know what the Ruggie principles are? Craig will tell us what the Ruggie principles are. Oh, later?
Well, actually, I was going to talk about the Ruggie.
Okay. All right. So it's suspense. So Craig will talk to you in a little while about the Ruggie principles, and that we're doing a project with ICO to develop a handbook and some training on the Ruggie principles. Siemens, a large German company, has they were fined by the World Bank, and the fine is being paid off by funding various research projects, various anti-bribery research projects. We're a subcontractor to Transparency USA on one of them, and what we are doing is writing a chapter about how the kinds of certification systems we work with, and by we, then it's SAI, the Forestry Stewardship Council, the Marine Stewardship Council, Fair Trade, might be used to verify compliance with anti-bribery programs. And You and Women, I guess I talked about, we're helping to operationalize their gender equality standard, which has been field tested in a few places in Egypt and other countries so far, and we're structuring it, and it's now in the consultation period, and it should be out soon. Still don't know whether I'm going up or down. And then this is the how do you know part. Our sister organization, Social Accountability Accreditation Services, oversees the inspection companies to make sure that a certification in one country means the same thing as a certification in another country, that within a country the certification bodies are all using the same criteria, are all interpreting SAI 1000 the same way, and to make sure that they are also doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is their own due diligence of the inspectors. ISO is the International Organization for Standardization, headquartered in Switzerland. It oversees there's a whole world of international standards in commerce. There's an international standard for machine tool, sizing, and so forth. You think of the ISO system has really enabled international trade to reach the kind of levels it's at, because it means if you're buying from a factory and they send you a sample and it's okay, how do you know, same thing, how do you know that when you order 10,000, they're all going to be like that one? And one of the ways is by the factory being certified to an ISO standard, which says there are systems in place to make it more likely than not that production policies and procedures will be followed. And this is the structure of a certification system, SAS, using the SA 8000 standard from SAI, working also with the Business Social Compliance Initiative, which is a European organization. SAS oversees inspection companies, certification bodies, and the certification bodies inspect factories. So SAS inspects certifiers just in very much the same way as certifiers inspect factories. SAS watches them in the field, gives them rules, revisits them. There are about over 1.5 million people now working in SA 8000 certified facilities around the world. There are probably an equivalent number working in facilities that are using the BSCI system, which is a stepping stone toward SA 8000. Let me say, I think that this doesn't sound like a lot of people. And it's not a lot of people. I mean, it's a lot of people, but it's not a lot of people, right? In context, however, it's not so bad. So it's about the same number of people, for instance, who work in fair trade certified facilities around the world. And so we feel that the impact of these various systems is felt, and we know it's felt way beyond the site where the specific sites which are currently certified. And SA 8000 is very widespread, 62 countries, 65 different product lines. So what my estimate would be of the impact, I'd say at least 10 times this number of people have received some benefit, I would say, from us at this point. So this shows the distribution of people who workers in SA 8000 certified facilities. India, there are a lot of the facilities in India that are SA 8000 certified are very large. And so that has helped the number come up. Italy, there's a very, very large number of certified facilities, most of which are quite small, because several Italian regions have government purchasing preferences for SA or requirements to be SA 8000 certified. And again, apparel and textiles are, well, certainly no longer I guess still the plurality, but metal products, so Tata Steel, for instance, is the single, and Tata Motors are two of the largest facilities in the world that are SA 8000 certified. But the cleaning services is Italy. So let's say many of the Italian railroads require that the companies that send cleaners to the stations be SA 8000 certified. This is an example of our work, this project that we recently completed in Central America. It was funded by the U.S. Department of Labor. Again, it was a partnership between us, some customer companies, and 4 NGOs in the 3 countries at issue. In agriculture, it's not a certification project. It was a training capacity building project. And as you see, in three crops. Our local partners first worked with us to do a diagnostic within each country to analyze the most pressing labor problems, and then worked with us on training, and they are now working on these issues after the project is over, which is really important. In the course of the project, these are some statistics of how many people were trained and where, and some outcomes, impacts, results. I don't know how much you talk about difference between outcomes and impact and results. It's very, it's jargony, but it also matters. So one of the things we talk about when the previous page, okay, that's what we call butts in seats. Okay, these people came to training. These are some results from the training. So you need to count how many people show up, but you also do need then try to figure out whether it mattered. So the farms improved in their protection of their personnel. They improved in the human rights, labor rights aspects by having more involvement of workers with management and management with workers. The third one is very important. In a couple of these countries, that's easy to measure because grievances which could not be resolved on site had to go up to the labor ministry, which meant it would take absolutely forever to get resolved. So it's important if the systems are in place on site. And the last one is there's more about that later, it's about cholera, or about anti-cholera. Beyond the farms, in PASE, in Nicaragua, they managed to bring together some trade unions which didn't normally work together. In the Dominican Republic, there are many, many issues. Large percentage of the agricultural workers are immigrants from Haiti. And thus the need to bring together the various parties to recognize the rights of those people and to provide them with some protections. So those are the second and third bullets. The third bullet, our Honduras partner, during the course of this program, there was a coup in Honduras. And so a lot of work stopped, but CDH thought of a useful and practical thing to do during the cessation, and they established a degree program in social responsibility at the National University, which is an ongoing activity. The cholera prevention action, well, I feel pretty good about this. At the farms that participated in this training program, as of the end of the cultivar, as of mid-year, there had been no cases of cholera. I want to say something else here. Oh, and one of our Dominican Republic partners has already been contracted by the EU to do more work, to do more training. So we have actually done both aspects of the capacity building that we sought to do there. Capacity building on the farms, but also capacity building of our partners so they can continue the work. Well, I don't know. I think I'm going to skip that. This we talked about. Perhaps if there are a lot of different standards and there's a lot of different inspection, then it's hard for people to manage, and we'd like to fix that. I'd like to make it easier for people to comply, and also to change the. It's an 80-20 probably. 80% of the. In some cases, in some countries, and at some times, 80% of the resources have been spent on inspection, only 20% on remediation. Obviously, it should be 20-80. A factory in India. We have 3 projects in India. Third one's about to start. One funded by the German government, one funded by the UK government, and the new one is another WE project also funded by Germany. Again, it's the same model, improving the capacity at manufacturing facilities to implement international labor norms. And in both cases, there's an interest in figuring out how this can be more than a specific period of time. So the German project is setting up has set up a CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility Center in Delhi, and a lot of the activities of the project are to qualify, trainers who will be at that center, and also to develop curriculum for those trainers to deliver to companies after the project is over. This is not applicable to the next slide, which is about rags, which is in the garment industry. But you see there, we do have someone sewing. This is an interesting project. It's attempting to create a connected set of activities from home workers through to retailers. So different grantees are working, some are working in the community with home workers. We are working in factories to increase factories' recognition of the rights of home workers and improve how they treat, how formal, to make more formal the relationships of home workers, and as an aspect of that is also to reduce gender discrimination because home workers, of course, are primarily female. So ETI is the Ethical Trading Initiative. They're a UK coalition of mostly supermarkets, but other companies as well, for ethical sourcing. Oh, we're at the end. Fantastic. The last slide was supposed to be left out because I know I got an email this morning or yesterday that the internship applications have already happened. So I have an email with 6 applicants already from the, whatever it's called now, I don't know, Center for this Work, I don't know, whoever it is who sent me the. So whatever path it is from which we have gotten Wellesley interns before, those applications have happened. We do have what our arrangement with Wellesley is that we get one intern per summer, unless we're very good. Sometimes we get 2 who are funded by Wellesley program. We also have and take, and are very happy to take, volunteers. Occasionally we have a project with some funding which can pay another intern. Last summer we actually happened to. So we were able to pay one of our unfunded interns, but we don't necessarily know in advance. And we are always interested if after you graduate, would like to come and work with us. The projects that you see are quite varied. So our interns have worked on, some of our interns spend a lot of time translating for us. Some of our interns have worked on trying to measure our impact. Various statistics on certification, and intern last summer, and possibly there'll be some work this summer, which then would be funded, working with me on this Siemens report, which there doesn't seem to be enough of a deadline for, so I've been dragging it out. This is the whole, I don't know how people are today, but every time I had a paper due, I was on the balcony in Tower Court from 1 to 4 o'clock in the morning writing it. I mean, I was incapable then and still am now, starting anything until I could taste the deadline. I don't know. Have people improved? I have one child who's like me, and another child who can't stand the anxiety and does everything in advance. Obviously a changeling, a foundling, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so we enjoy our ability to contribute to the implementation of international principles, and invite you to ask questions and to join us in the work.
My name is Gina White, and I really appreciate what you're telling us about regulation of NGOs, because they can reach the marginalized populations that the government might not otherwise reach. Right. And I was wondering how this applies to healthcare in general, and specifically because I understand that in places like India, the NGOs, the healthcare NGOs, can reach the marginalized populations sometimes better than the government can. And I'm just wondering what kind of regulation is done on the healthcare NGOs and how that can encourage cooperation with the government. 2 answers.
The first answer is, of course, is a temporization. The next speaker. But that's afternoon. Ophelia will know. But I was just talking to somebody about this. Let's see if I'm not sure I can remember who it was. And I said, we're talking about the importance of involving local NGOs, something specific, I can't remember. And I said, well, there was someone from a UN agency, and I said, well, the UN? And whoever it was said, well, it's the same thing for the UN as it would be for you. The UN needs to go out and identify individual NGO partners in villages, in whatever country it is. Just do not have the and then there's also a question of I know this is not answering your question, but continuing down this path. It's also a question of who do you want, and this brings me to I have several favorite anecdotes. You haven't heard any of them yet. So this one is I think, again, more germane, though. I was commuting back and forth for a week with someone who worked for the Canadian Aid Organization. And I said, so what was and he was about to retire. What was the most successful project you ever worked on? And he said, well, I figure I worked on one successful project. And, oh, okay. And what made that successful? And he said, we felt there was only one project he'd worked on. So these are basically traditional aid projects in specific countries and specific villages. He figured there was only one in which the local people, the beneficiaries, had actually designed the program. And that was, was sound knowledge and sound information, and it was a little depressing, I would have thought, from his point of view, if he'd been doing this for 40 years and had one project that he felt satisfied about. But probably you should say, great, he had one, and learning to pass on. But that's really important. And there are all sorts of casual anecdotes about relief in specific situations where 10 agencies bring in tents and no agency brings in water, and what people need are water. So there are, again, this speaks to what I was saying before about the expertise. But in India there are thousands of NGOs and don't necessarily get along with each other, and aren't any given organization is not necessarily going to be around next year. We've had NGO partners in India which have not been able to sustain themselves, and whom we haven't been able to work with the way we've been able to work in Central America to sustain them. So it's a real it's a problem. But I know that if you will ask Ophelia that question, she will be able to give you a much more substantive answer, not sort of temporizing.
Thank you. You mentioned about a plugin you're devising for women's rights, I think. Could you tell us about how that plugin, or whatever that might entail, that's different than the core elements of the SAI?
Well, it has more detail. So it's a gender equality standard and has several parts, and I'm obviously not going to be able to sort of bring up to quote from it at the moment, but it's a several-page document which provides detail on the specific issues, rather than just, very often you'll find a statement saying there should not be discrimination in the workplace. So this then goes through several topics on how there should not be discrimination in, how there shouldn't be discrimination in training, how there shouldn't be discrimination in, there should not be pregnancy tests, there should not be, there should be provision for women's needs in terms of they may want someplace that there are facilities for nursing, or their child care facility or something. So generally, specific ways to have a more gender equal and more gender women favorable workplace. And so, as I say, this is drafted by UN Women, which is a coalition then of UN agencies. It's been field tested, and we are hoping, we're just at the stage now of finalizing by consulting about the text, but the idea is that there would not be yet another certification, but that this would provide useful detail for people to put into their current system. So you can replace your clause saying women should not be discriminated against with this is how women should not be discriminated against. And the companies we've talked to have, and we're surveying on this, have agreed that they're likely to be useful. As a standalone certification, we don't think it'll be very widely used, although it can be. But the real usefulness would be to be incorporated in an existing structure, and to make that structure more sound.
Hi, thank you. I actually had two questions, not necessarily related to each other. First, you said that Siemens was fined by World Bank, and I was curious of how, why it was fined exactly, and how it was, obvious that they did something wrong. And another one, you said that also, after the companies meet with certain standards, do you foster any improvements, and how do you do that? in terms of like better better salaries, better work hours, or is it like financial incentives, or mostly like good policy incentive?
Okay, it's a mix. Siemens, I think you should. It's probably a longer discussion. We can either do it at lunch, or you can look it up, because it's bribery thing is my sideline, but it's probably not so germane here. The incentives, there's straightforward incentives. You will get more business if your customers don't think you're going to embarrass them, or you will get more business if your customers feel your values are aligned with theirs, or you will get more business because your customers don't want to buy stuff made by children. So there's that set of incentives, which does, I think, operate at the factory level. It's still hard to tell whether it operates at the consumer level. I forgot to ask you my favorite question, which I ask at Wellesley every time I come. Have you ever boycotted a product because because it was something bad about it? Raise your hands. Show of hands. Okay. And have you followed up to see if they improved their practices and started buying it again? See, they know that. And so the incentive for companies, the incentive for brands, is to not get caught. And that's not the way we want it to be. We want the incentive to be to find problems and address problems and improve and be better. But this is not just you, I'm sorry to say. This is generally true, and so the general feelings mostly in most companies still is we'd rather not get noticed. And that is another story that's comparable to that, which cuts both ways again. There was a toy factory in California where the workers were amazingly abused, and in the United States, where people were being kept prisoner and really, really amazingly badly treated. The regulatory agent, the authorities found them, they closed it down, and then there was the union, or the local NGO, I'm not sure who it was. Anyway, the workers' representatives were seeking back pay. And they did a campaign against Toys R Us to get Toys R Us to ensure the back pay was paid. And they did. Afterwards, Toys R Us went to the campaigners and said, okay, we're glad people got paid, and we're glad we helped people to get paid, but why did you attack us since we were not the biggest customer of this factory? And they said, well, because we knew you'd do something. So clearly, from the point of view of the workers' representatives, that's the correct action. What you want is for people to get their back pay. Clearly, from the point of view of trying to get companies to be willing to step up and admit they have a problem and admit they're addressing a problem, it's not so cool. But that's a basic sort of an intrinsic conflict. The other kinds of incentives, as I said, may be actual improvements in business. So the Chinese factory in the first case study found that when things were going, as internal systems and performance improved, they were finishing more on time, and they didn't have to airship anything. If they were late enough so they had to airship, it's their own cost. They saved a huge amount of money by getting things done on schedule and being able to ship by boat, for instance. They also had, like Manpower, have significant savings from lower worker turnover. And then along with lower worker turnover, there's also better product quality. And many of our corporate members report that the product quality is more consistent from a certified factory. And that's another favorite, not a certification story, but another story. 20 years ago, there was a campaign about soccer balls. Soccer balls were being sewn by children in northern Pakistan. And there was an international campaign to get these children out of the workplace. I spoke to a manufacturer who said, well, he had employed children, and then the campaign happened, and he replaced them with adults. And he said, my product rejection rate went from 13% to 0.5%. So I figure I'm 12% more profitable with the adults than I was with the children. it's a had I but known. But it's a good story because it shows most people who are running factories are very busy running the factories. They don't have an operations research department and analyzing everything for them and telling them whether or not this is the most effective way or this is the most efficient way, or whether they're, they set up a factory like the guy next door. And but that's good because it means that a lot of bad practices are not necessarily profitable. And so that when you help people change their bad practices and they're better off, that's great. And that a lot of people who are doing things badly or meanly or unfairly are not doing it out of malice, but are doing it out of either ineptitude or carelessness or lack of information. And so there's a lot of space there to improve things in a non-contentious and a relatively soft manner, and that's part of the idea of doing a lot of training and capacity building. We can help people analyze their systems and see that they would be better off if they had better trained workers, which means they have people who stay with them longer, which means they're treating them better. One more of these, and then I'll go back to the questions. So somebody from an American company called us a few years ago and said, we have this factory, and we asked them to get SA 8000 certified, but they say they can't get certified because they hold their workers' passports. I said, well, that's right. That's forced labor. They can't. And so she said, but he says that if he doesn't hold their passports, they'll quit. And I'm waiting for, for something to happen on the other end of the phone. So finally I said to her, well, can you think of another way of keeping them from quitting? And she said, and she got it. She said, treat them better? Which I like because it's obvious, but also I like it because it shows that a lot of us still say, when somebody says to them, oh, this is the way we do it here, and you are being culturally insensitive, or you're being, you don't understand that we're not at an economic stage in our economy where we can do that. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes we take it too much at face value. And this was clearly somebody who was saying, obviously she was plenty able to figure out that she doesn't not quit because her employer is holding her passport, but that she just didn't think it through at all because she was concerned with understanding and sort of accepting the way they thought. Now I have several questions over here.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have another question that is kind of going off the theme of incentives. And when your earlier slide that mentioned you have about 1 million or so trainees in SA 8000, and I was wondering how you plan or how you see that scaling up to affect more people. And also, do you seek out companies that that you want to be certified, or the companies have to come to you?
Let me ask, the second one's quicker. No, we don't. We do seek out customer companies to some extent. We speak to groups of businesses, and sometimes we contact a customer company if it looks, we don't contact factories. The factory's direct relationship is not with us, it's with the certification company. And a number of certified organizations have come to us because their certification company was already certifying them, which is one of the ISO standards, one of the business-to-business standards, and that have been brought along. One way of scaling up is through public procurement. That's starting to happen a little bit. There's also there's several countries in which there are procurement preferences for ethically produced goods. And that's a huge untapped area. I mean, there's really no reason that every government shouldn't have. I mean, many governments in the United States, at least, well, the one government in the United States that I worked for had equal opportunity purchasing preferences. And there's really no reason that the governments also cannot have, and many are starting to have, seriously have purchasing preferences. You get more points on your application if you're treating your employees properly. There's a new law in California asking for supply chain sustainability reporting, and generally the reporting then tends to move on to the requirements. So those are two things. The other thing that we all, again, believe in the social certification business is that there is a point at which there will become a sort of semi-critical mass where it'll be more normal to be able to demonstrate that you are following international norms, and that the questions will come up if you cannot demonstrate that you're following international norms. It's not so much that every organization does not need to be certified. Every organization needs to be compliant with international labor conventions, and some of them will be certified, some of them will not be certified. That's fine, but they will be treating their workers properly, and those are our goals. There is a requirement, the standard does require that people be paid enough to live on in a regular work week. And that's a very, when you hear discussion and when you talk about living wage or basic needs wage, that's a very important, it's a full sentence. So clearly people can work 80 hours a week and they're eating, okay, so they're getting enough to live on. But the requirement, the ethical and moral and legal requirement, is that people be able to live on what they earn before overtime. And the overtime is always voluntary. Right. There's one.
Well, going off Kaylee Red's question, you mentioned Italy as an example of, like, there is a lot of demand in Italy for the certification. So how can that demand, or like that model, be replicated in other countries? Like, why is there such demand?
Well, that's public procurement, straightforward.
So do you engage in promoting this on like a higher level, or?
No, I don't think we have the. I mean, there's a lot of awareness that this could be done. There are some EU policies about having positive public procurement. We were asked when this came up with the Dutch government, we were asked to provide a lot of information while they made the decision about whether or not to include it. But there's not really much, as I say, the European governments have all discussed what kind of purchasing preferences they're going to have. Some said U.S. governments have equal opportunity, but you've seen that there's not that much will throughout the U.S. for instance, for a living wage requirement. And let me say, the other thing that I say every time I come here, Wellesley does not have ethical procurement policies, to my continuing many decades dismay. Nor does Columbia. But for instance, I was talking about my younger daughter, the history major. They went to a college with a lot of ethical self-importance, to Swarthmore. And while she was there, they actually calculated what a living wage would be for the non-academic, non-faculty employees of the college, what the living wage would work out to per hour in all the counties around Swarthmore, and mounted a successful campaign for the school to pay it. There was a similar movement at Harvard, there was a similar movement in Columbia, which I believe stopped. Not to say that Swarthmore is better than Harvard, Columbia, but definitely has a lot more invested in its morality. Certainly, but I don't know. One time I was here and I was talking about this, and when we had a little discussion, a little conversation about not double-siding your paper. So I don't know. I think, and somebody said, well, in their department, they don't double-side because you had to use lower quality paper or something to double-side. So I don't know. I don't know how far you still have to come. This again is related, though, to going back decades and decades to investment policies of universities' endowments. And as you know, that's been these have been under discussion for I don't know, many decades, starting off with disinvestment from companies that operate in South Africa and continuing to today. And again, there's a lot of scope for universities' endowments to be ethical investors, and some, I think all are to some extent. Very few are to the extent that they could be. And there are similarly CalPERS, which is the California Employees, California State Pension Institution, is one of the leading ethical investors in the United States. The New York City pension managers have also been among the leaders in ethical investment. So that means two things, that not avoiding buying shares of companies that are not socially responsible, and also engaging with the companies whose shares you have to persuade them to improve their policies. Is that it? No more colors? Nobody in black? So one more anecdote, one more thing for the economists in the group. So I was talking about this about these initiatives and positive consumer purchasing and positive retailer purchasing with Jagdish Bhagwati, who was one of my graduate school professors. Who is not a believer in preference in fair trade, but believer in free trade. But he said, well, yeah, okay. He said, okay. However, okay, as Kelvin Lancaster, so that we're getting very, very name-droppy here. As Kelvin Lancaster once said, every purchasing decision, consumer preferences is a bundle, and so it had to be black, and it had to be not too wrinkly, and it can also be from an ethical factory, and that's an acceptable and rational set of consumer preferences, which are acceptable even to a free trade person. And I think that's the way to look at this. I mean, you've sometimes talked to people who say, well, there's no evidence that consumers will pay for or want or seek out ethically produced goods. Well, there's certainly a lot of evidence that consumers will seek out organic produce, God knows. And the price premium on organic is astounding. And there have been quotes from supermarket people saying, if I had any idea the price premium I could have gotten for organic produce, I would have been selling lots more of it many, many, many years ago. And I assume in Boston, as in New York, the amount of organic produce available in the average upper middle class neighborhood grocery store is enormous. And it has grown very rapidly and is very expensive. And the grocery stores are making a lot of money on their organic produce. We are still looking for the opportunity for everybody to similarly vote with their dollars on organically produced clothing, ethically produced clothing, ethically produced everything else. That takes me back to where we're talking about the information costs, and that's again why certification, although not probably not the answer for everything, because it is expensive also to maintain certification, but it does provide you the opportunity to ethically purchase without doing lots and lots of research. And that's, so we're still there's been a very little bit of research done on consumer response to ethical labeling. And it's been very positive. And no, I think he's standing me up this afternoon too. It's been done by a group at Harvard, and they've labeled towels, fair and square towels, just plain towels, and people bought 20% more of the fair and square towels, and they also continued to buy them at a price premium. So there's been a few. There's also been an eBay experiment. There's been a few market tests of whether or not people will respond to ethical labeling as they have responded to organic and has responded to fair trade. And they're positive, but there's still no big movement. So that's something you can work on, please. Thank you.